Today is Wednesday, March 7th, 2012, and my name is Audrey Fishman Franklin, and I'm interviewing Bill and Rita Corn. This interview is being recorded for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program and the Boulder Jewish Oral History Project. This interview is being filmed by Dorothy Charlo. The Boulder Jewish Oral History Project would like to get a sense of what Jewish life and the life of Jews were like in 20th century Boulder, and to learn about the development of Boulder's thriving Jewish community, how we got to where we are today. And Bill and Rita Corn were there and during those early days and can help tell that story. So I'd first like to direct some questions to you individually.
Okay.
And first, Rita, could you first tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and September 11th, 1928.
And Ted, could you tell me about the origins of your family?
Yes. My parents came from Russia. They had a hard time getting over here. They discussed. They told us that they used to put in stuff in their clothes, sew it up, and then head off into the wilderness or wherever they went. But they ended up going to Antwerp, Belgium. There they had, in Belgium, the highest, I think it's the highest.
That's
the highest had a camp there for these refugees, and they enjoyed their time there. But that's where my father met my mother, in Antwerp.
Camp.
And he was he came over from Russia, but a different part of Russia. And when they left Antwerp, my mother went on one ship. She was with her sisters and her brother, and her parents were gone already. And they had an aunt. They had an older sister that lived in America, and an uncle that paid for their way over here. And they, what do they do? Trying to put it together. My father came over after my mother left Belgium, and he was supposed to go to Canada, but he fell in love with my mother, and what he did was he got on a ship and as a fireman, and where he landed, I have some papers to show where he landed, and he just jumped ship, and he stayed here with my mother, got married, had 3 children, but
In Chicago. In
Chicago, yes.
Made it to Chicago.
It's amazing that my father didn't speak English, didn't know how to read or write English, but they managed, and he was a very bright man, and learned he learned English, and he got himself a job as a painter. Painted the houses and things like that, and he was very much into music and art. they lived on, I don't know for sure, but they lived on the west side of Chicago.
And were they involved in Judaism?
Well, my mother was a little bit more involved.
Mm-hmm.
My father did not believe in Judaism. He really was very depressed because of the war.
Mm-hmm.
He lost his sister, he lost his brother, he lost his mother, all in war. And he wanted to bring his sister over, but she fell in love with a Russian soldier, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And she stayed in Russia. Of course, she was killed during Hitler's time. His mother was also gone, and there were, I think, 5 children that, I hope that's correct, 5 children. And he, after the war was over, he wrote to the family, and he got one response that there was a child of his sister with left, and he what did he do? The Iron Curtain came down at that time, and they just heard from him again, and so we don't know what happened to him. That's
Your parents, though, came over about what year? Do you
I
know
would
about
say I was before World War One, so it had to be in the early, the 1920s, early 20s. I don't know exactly.
So, so if this applies, then did Judaism or being Jewish play any part in your formative years?
Yes and no. I like to sing, and so I would go to the synagogue and shul. Where was the synagogue? Shul, an old-fashioned shul, and it was a beautiful place. We lived. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. We lived on the west side, and my mother said she wanted to move north, where there were more Jewish people, and she did. They borrowed money from an uncle, and they bought a 3-flat apartment building. They were probably 2 blocks from the shul, and my brother was bar mitzvah. I don't remember too much about that, but I like to sing. So the music director, Rabbi Alevsky, that's right, Alevsky. He was a really Jewish European musician, and so we sang in the chorus, and I love to sing those Jewish songs. So we sang in the chorus, and he taught us all the music, and his nephew played in or his grandson, I think it was his grandson, played in the Philadelphia orchestra. Yeah, he learned. He told me he studied in Russia, so that's that. But as far as being religious, we weren't religious.
What are there other things that you'd want to describe that were of central importance to you and your family's life in Chicago?
Well, they had their sisters close by, and they had a brother who was killed. He had a store in the black neighborhood, and he hired this young boy to work for him, and he caught stealing, so he fired him, and it was a sad part because they, wanted to be helpful, but this young man came back and shot him because he was fired, and he had a little girl that we don't know what happened. She lives in Arizona, some place, I don't know. But, sorry, but
Those family that,
right. But my mother, she wanted to keep a kosher home. My father did, well, he thought it was stupid. And he was educated in Judaism because he had a beautiful voice, and he sang. He didn't sing in the choir, but he sang, and he enjoyed.
because we're gonna. So, thank you. Bill, can you tell us
Yeah.
where, when and where you were born?
Yes. I was born August 23rd, 1923, in Chicago. There were two major Jewish hospitals. I was born in one of those two. And we lived on the west side, which was like in Denver, the West Colfax, only on a bigger scale because there were more Jews in Chicago. And the earliest I remember is like I was in kindergarten in 5th grade, or 1, 2, 3, yeah, when I was 5 years old. And then I went to a Lawson Grammar School in Chicago that was mostly Jewish. I went to that school till I graduated 8th grade. No, I beg your pardon. I went to that school for 4 years. Then I went to another neighborhood school and the last 4 years of grammar school. Then I went to a high school in Chicago for 4 years. And then I was confronted with the real life because my parents were immigrants from Russia, a town called Satinover, Satinover. When Rita and I went to Israel, they have the display of all the little towns where the Jews were killed in Russia and Poland, those places. And we found the little town my parents came from was there. And my father, I'm told, there were 12 children in his family. We knew 2 aunts, 2 sisters of his were our aunts that were in America. And they had children, so we knew their children. The sisters of my father, each of the 2 of the children we knew, They were the only grandchildren on my father's side. But they were in America, and my dad, before he married my mother, I don't know all the details, but he had traveled around the world quite a bit. He's wound up in London, and he once mentioned South America, too. And in London, he learned the trade of being a trunk maker. You know trunks?
Yes. Yes.
They were a big thing in those days.
Yes.
That was his trade. Both were not educated, neither my mother nor my father. They both spoke English. They spoke Russian, of course. But they spoke English, as all immigrants eventually would. Went through Ellis Island.
And what year was that, Bill? Do you,
Well,
about?
I was the youngest of 3 children. My brother was born 5 years before me. I'm 88 now, so he would have been born, I think he was born in 1915. And I have a sister who's now 93 years old. She was born 3 years later, 1918. All of us in Chicago, and my mother had 3 sisters, a brother that had come to America in addition to her parents, and they had 1 child from the Russian, my grandparents had 1 additional child that remained in Russia and was killed by the Nazis. So there were, when I remember we had 3 weddings for my mother's 3 younger sisters. My mother was the oldest.
Now, could you tell me what part did Judaism play in your growing up and in your family?
Well, my folks were Orthodox Jews. My mother kept a kosher home. There really wasn't any cheating as far I remember, as only as early as I was 5 or 6 years old. Because we lived in a building. One of the other neighbors, the man was a barber, and he had 2 sons that I became friendly with. We all went to the same schools, Progression, and we lived on a main street in the Jewish neighborhood at that time. In fact, I have a picture of me. I don't know the age, I must have been 10, 11, around there.
Was besides your Jewish life, what were there other interests that your
Well,
or activities that
I
your
used to go to
family had?
Hebrew school,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember my bar mitzvah. My sister helped me write a speech for my bar mitzvah. And it was in a little old building. It used to cost $0.25 every week to go there, but we were like 3 months behind in the dues. And I used to go home after school, get a snack or something, and go from like 4 o'clock to maybe 6 o'clock. For a few years, it was also the neighborhood, but not real next door. It was a long 4 Chicago blocks, which here would be around 2 or 3 local blocks. But I did all that walking, and I belonged also to a boys' club. There was a municipal boys' club that would, not just for the Jewish kids, there were a lot of Jewish kids. We'd go into the baseball game for a nickel.
Like you should in Chicago.
In Chicago, the Cubs and the White Sox. And also at that time, like all normal boys, we became interested in automobiles, even though we didn't have a car. But my brother was subsequently, my dad was a natural salesman. He would talk to people slow, no high blood, no high pressure, and he would make sales. He did the best he could to make a living, but it was a struggle. And rent in those days was $25, $35 a month. Till my first year of high school. We finished in the old neighborhood. Then we moved to a little bit better Jewish neighborhood, where the rent was $55. That was 1942, till my mother died in 1957. We lived in that apartment. And in those days it had a bath and a half, which you didn't run into very frequently. And my mother died in that apartment. And we had the problem, inherited from my father, of being allergic to hay fever. Ragweed pollen is very big in the Midwest. And from high school days, we would try to go away to Upper Michigan or Miami Beach, Florida, from August 15th to September 15th, if the weather would cooperate. We needed cooler weather or rain to get rid of the pollen. So we would go to these towns, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, or Miami Beach, Florida, and we would get rooms. My father and myself, my mother and my sister. We'd rent rooms in private homes. They would have an upstairs usually. It was very reasonable, and we'd eat out or whatever we could do in the room. But we didn't rent a kitchen, just 2 bedrooms.
Now tell me how you met and when you married.
Also, before that, the economic times were very bad. My mother had to get a job in the garment industry for maybe 4 years to help out of the worst part of the Depression. We used to take in boarders. We had a baker. He would work at night, and every morning he'd bring us a brand new, freshly baked bread. And he'd have his meals. We even had a lady once, an older woman. We kept a kosher house. My mother did. And my father just did the best he could. And
So,
my mother was the motivating factor in our home.
and when
And the children were my mother's glorified main things in her life. Typical.
That's right. That's right. And tell me when
What?
on our way to Boulder, tell me where you
Okay.
met and
Well,
when you were married.
My mother died in 1957, so that broke up the home. My dad moved to Florida. He had 2 sisters there at the time, And then my sister moved up to the north side of Chicago, and I moved in with her. She had a 3-bedroom apartment, and I shared a bedroom with one of my nephews. Yeah. And at that time, wasn't it Paul's friends I knew that introduced? Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew someone that her brother-in-law, Paul, her sister's husband, he knew a girl. Oh yeah, the girl had married one of his partners. And then I met them through the family, and they set up a blind date for Rita and I. And that began it all. I remember going up to their first floor apartment, up the stairway after I rang the bell. That's where I met my Rita. And,
That's the best story.
Huh?
That's the best story.
Yes, that's right. I remember that very well.
Now tell me why and when you came to Boulder.
Well, we became engaged, and then
Well, let me
in
tell
March,
you, let me put it-
in March or April,
Let me interject something. I used to, I have a girlfriend who came out here to go to school. Her name is Sunny Cooper. She's a nun, she lives in.
at the University of Illinois.
Yeah, she lives in she lives in,
That girl that she's talking about,
you know,
no, that was Sonny.
New Mexico. I couldn't get her out. She lives in New Mexico, and she still lives there with her husband and her kids. She's her great grandmother. She told me, I spoke to her recently. And, well, she used to come out here. Her husband was a physicist, and he worked out at
Who was that, Rita?
Ralph.
Ralph used to come up here?
He worked in Los Alamos,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. We met them on our honeymoon. They were one of the high spots of coming out west from Chicago to the what to.
Well, I came out before
Yeah, she had been here.
I met, I went out to New Mexico, and I liked it very much out here. And I didn't want to live in Chicago. I didn't
She
like,
wanted to get out of Chicago.
yeah,
And I wasn't locked up into anything. So I said, okay, I didn't know any better.
and we went
We went to, on our honeymoon, we went to visit the Coopers in Los Alamos, and we were in Montrose. We went to a dude ranch,
yeah,
and before we got there, I said, Rita, don't tell them you're a newlywed, they'll rip you. So we're going to the first dinner, the first day we're there. We're going to dinner, and we met people from our cabin, another cabin. And I said, this is my wife, Rita Corn, and Rita Rubin, and my name was Corn. So I gave it away.
they said, oh, you're newlyweds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was funny.
Very,
But
very.
we took off. From there, we went to Arizona, and we
Yeah.
went to New Mexico, and we decided that we were gonna. I didn't want to go back to Chicago,
Yeah.
so we decided that we would come back to Colorado because that was the nicest place out of the whole trip. Arizona was hot and dry, and New Mexico wasn't green like here. We got a lot of green here, you know, and so Bill picked out, let's stay here in. by
We
the-
had to start somewhere,
by
and
the
we were right
university.
here.
And,
So we picked Boulder,
yes,
and the motel we stayed at is gone now. It was right, you know where the Dark Horse is in Boulder? And they tore down an auto repair shop right before it, right where Broadway 36 goes diagonal. There used to be a motel there. And that's where we first stood until we rented a one-bedroom apartment.
yeah.
And how did you pay for that one-bedroom apartment?
Well-
What did you do for work?
I had to get a job turned out in Boulder. I had a job in Denver, beg your pardon. I had a job in Boulder 3 days after I got here.
Yeah.
We got here August 15th, and around
And what year
August
was
the
that?
20th.
When did you arrive in Boulder?
August 15th,
What-
1960. A week later, I had a job. But the first day on the job, there was a man who was a big wheeler dealer financier. He owned 2 big companies, 2 insurance companies. I was hired to be controller of the 2 companies. The first day I'm on the job, there are SCC men all over the place. In a week, they were bankrupt. The next week, the second company was bankrupt, and the new management, after another 2 weeks, wanted to move me to their office in
Texas.
Texas, yeah. At the same rate of salary, I turned them down, and I got a job in Denver for about 9 or 10 months. And then I was actually unemployed without a job, and I had a pregnant wife. So I opened up an office without any clientele to do accounting work. It was the income tax season.
I said to him, why don't you just put a little ad in the paper and see what happens?
No. I had a neighbor who was a realtor right where we lived at 10th and Pine. So he let me do his income tax return. And I rented an office, 1 room and a 3-room office. Nobody else was there, it was all empty. On 1113 Spruce. And now it's that old building there.
Yep.
And I was one of the original tenants. And then a tenant of mine and myself bought the adjoining building maybe 4 years later. So he and I owned the adjoining building, and eventually I bought him out, and I sold that building to what is now that big office building next to my old office.
When we saw
Yeah,
the building that we lived in I had 2 children there. We bought a 6-unit apartment building. It was
yeah.
cheap then to buy, but I remember calling my mother, telling her, you know, that there was an apartment building, and one of the reasons I wanted that building was it fit my bedroom set. It was a big room. I couldn't
That
get my
was
bedroom.
always on my mind.
Yeah,
What do we do about that bedroom set?
yeah, and so I called my mother and I told her there was this 6-unit apartment building. She says, buy. She was a real gung-ho person. I said, but you,
I was smart enough to use my own good
you
judgment.
know,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
Her mother was right.
we bought it. And we moved in and we lived there.
So I'm gathering, I might know answer to this question, but so did a Jewish community or the lack of Jewish community influence you in any way in deciding to
Oh,
move to
yeah.
Boulder?
Yes.
Well, at that time, it was town or university or the town. Most of the,
Should we stop it? Okay.
when I left high school, it was in June. So we were gonna work that summer. What do you do when you get a job? When you're looking for a job, you look in the paper. The Jewish boys didn't do that, or girls. They weren't hiring Jews. So we had to go to an employment agency that was run by the Jews who knew where they could send us. Otherwise, we're spinning the wheels.
Now tell me, we were discussing, did the Jewish community or the lack of Jewish community at that time influence you in any way when you were deciding to move to
Well,
Boulder?
we were hoping we would like Boulder, and it took me 2 years, about 2 years till I decided to open an office. I had a job for about a year. And we were hoping the Jewish thing would improve, because we were gonna have a family.
Okay, let me tell
Yeah,
some of that. We have the university, and there are lots of Jewish professors in there, but they, didn't let anybody know they were Jewish. They were still shy about being Jewish.
yeah.
But we have Hillel here, and it's still on the corner of Colorado and 28, and
That's where we rented our first temporary apartment.
yeah, we had a rabbi there called Rabbi Elephant.
From Hillel.
From the Hillel, and he had four boys, and he was Orthodox, and he used to send his boys on bus to Denver, and I had a son growing up, and I wanted him to, be bar mitzvah, and it was what we did.
There were no bat mitzvahs at that time.
There was no shul there at that time.
Nothing, yeah.
And what we did was we hired two brothers that
One of them is a prominent doctor now in Denver,
yeah,
Harley Rothbart.
yeah.
Yeah,
He came over. He was a student here at CU, and he came over and taught Michael how to
Yeah.
daven and read Hebrew, and
there was
And,
one other fellow too. I forget his name now.
well, his brother
Garden Swartz, wasn't it, the
Yeah.
other one?
Garden.
Garden Swartz. That's
Yeah.
a big name in Denver, or used to be.
They had that where my son was,
Garden Swartz was the first one.
yes,
Harley was the second one, Harley Rothbart.
right, and he was bar mitzvah. We had to get a rabbi from Denver. We had Rabbi,
Oh, for Michael's bar mitzvah?
yeah, Rabbi, what's his name?
He wasn't a well-known,
Uh,
I couldn't get a big man. Lederman was the only big guy at that time.
Yeah. We used
They-
to go to, every Sunday, we'd take our kids to
Sunday school
Sunday school at
at
Hebrew Alliance.
Hebrew Alliance.
in
At
Denver.
the old,
No, it wasn't Hebrew
the old
Alliance.
Hebrew Alliance
Yeah,
In Denver.
in Denver.
in East Denver.
We
Yeah.
go there, and they have a book review. And they
And
have
once a month, they had a book review. And the place was mobbed.
moms it, And
get it,
they
yeah.
served lox and bagels and,
So when the children were in Hebrew school, they had something for adults.
By then, they had, things were rolling better, because that's 10,
Yeah.
12 years later.
and they had a wonderful art teacher there. She just knew how to work with the children. And my two
You
daughters,
by us? What do you
Yeah.
mean the Hebrew Alliance?
and Hebrew Alliance,
Oh,
and the kids would learn, and my son wanted to do more with his Hebrew. He really wanted to study with Rabbi Lederman, and he did. He went
Yeah.
on a year
he
after
got
his,
along very well with
yeah,
this big rabbi.
with after he bar mitzvah, he was wanted to stay on another
My
year.
son really has a,
Well, tell me then about the formation of the Jewish Fellowship. Is that
Yes, it
right?
is.
Yes,
well,
tell
that
me
was
about
here.
that.
They would get together occasionally. It wasn't like they'd been doing it for 20 years or something. And there weren't a lot of people in it. But there weren't a lot of Jews in Boulder.
They were really.
But it was at the time when you came
Yeah.
that it was starting, or it
It was
had-
just-
It
just started.
existed, but it wasn't a tradition or anything. It was,
we had, what really did it kick off was the fact that Rabbi Elton's wife, Hannah,
she was the usual,
Bill,
Right.
let me explain. And she would invite the women in the group, in the community, to her house. And she bring Judaism into the community.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And she was really, I would say, one of the promising
A real balabusta.
she was,
You know what that is?
and
Yeah, yeah.
and then she left. They left. Her son,
Wait.
you know, the fellowship started to grow with the women. Yes, that's what really triggered it.
Yeah,
They
the women
not-
were the active ones.
Not the
The
men.
men, no.
Men did not do they could argue all they want, but it was the women. We serve, you know, we do things for the community, the
Yeah.
Jewish community, the children. We had as many children we had. There were, you know, a handful.
Well, and how many people at that point were part of the fellowship or went to the fellowship?
Oh.
Do you think?
At that time,
What, I imagine a couple of dozen or so, honey, to begin with?
yeah, we can name a few
Maybe
that are still around. You know, what's her name? Laura Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
She was a member.
Yeah.
Where
Art Eston.
honest that
Mhm.
he lives where I live now, and wait a minute. What's her name?
Herbie and Gilda came along when we did.
Yeah, they were
So when you came, Hannah,
elephant.
Elephant,
Oh.
Rabbi's wife.
and were they part of Hillel, or they were?
They were, he was a Hillel rabbi.
Yes, he was a rabbi.
He worked for Hillel.
I see.
And we used to have services there, and
Yeah, yeah.
that's.
So instead of a congregation at that point, it was
They
just a
didn't want to
group
have a
of.
congregation.
A few years later,
There weren't enough people.
There weren't enough people to
We
support
began-
them.
Yeah.
we
Right.
began renting for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the shopping center, places to hold the holidays.
And that was near Sunrise Center, that was on 30th Street near,
No, there were
Okay.
2, 3 different locations.
ah,
You know where, when you come out of King Soopers
yes.
and you go to
I don't remember that.
30th Street, the back, there's another little shopping, all the way to the back. A Jewish fellow built that place, and we rented space there. Yeah.
So what other activities did the fellowship provide?
Well, the high holidays, they started having holiday services. They started to have Purim. They had the carnival, things like that. But the women prepared the food, did all the work.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But the women also had, it sounds like, a study
we have a study group.
I don't know if they had a study group, Rita.
Well,
I don't remember.
I don't either. I'm not-
It
But-
wasn't big in our memories about a
Yeah.
study group. They were more the busy type ladies, you know.
And we try to keep it, you know, they thought the women belonged in the kitchen. The men thought that. Well, the women got mad, and they started to say, "No way, we're out here," and they took over. It really was the women that put this show together, and we thought, you know, it should be men involved, but it wasn't. They became involved as time went on, and of course now it's amazing to see how many beautiful children that we have over there.
Yeah, yeah.
So a couple of questions. What prompted you both to want to be a part of fellowship and to build a
There was nothing
synagogue?
else.
No,
If you were Jewish, there was no other way of meeting people.
And why did you think that was important? Why
Why?
did you think that was
If you're
important?
Jewish, that's what you do.
I thought it was very important because I wanted my children to know Judaism.
Yeah. She gets all the credit for that in our family.
And my daughter Zoe went to Israel twice, and my younger daughter Marcia, you know, now she has a son of her own, and she takes him to Hebrew Alliance on Sunday. She takes Sunday school, and
The old Beth Joseph, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And
she wants them. I said I
when we
hope
were,
I'm here so that she will be bas mitzvah. You know,
we were lucky that eventually Rabbi Goldberger came along, because Lederman was getting to be an old man. So his shul in Denver was very busy and proper, so we used to go there for yurtzeit and everything.
So Rita, because your background in Judaism, it doesn't sound as though it was as strong as Bill. So
No,
what
that's-
did influence you?
Well,
to-
I had been active in B'nai B'rith. I used to be president of a lodge in Chicago, a young man's lodge, because the old B'nai B'rith were the Alta Cockers. So I was always interested in that aspect of Judaism. And then I ran a big, very successful, once a month I'd bring in outside speakers at Temple Shalom in Chicago, right on Lakeshore Drive. I'd get the biggest Chicagoan personalities. No money, not for money. And for about 2 years I did that. So we're always interested.
So
She used to go Friday night to the rabbi the Orthodox rabbi running services.
No, he had,
So we had that background,
Yeah.
and,
not so much from our parents, but from B'nai B'rith for me and the Orthodox rabbi for her.
Interesting, interesting. So can you tell me now about how the fellowship did become Congregation Har HaShem?
Well,
and what
after
that
a few
took?
years of renting the outside places for services, and more Jews began coming in, the scientists, we grew.
And when you say the scientists, you mean the university or NCAR or
All those
IBM?
places,
all
yeah.
the,
And IBM,
I
so there were more coming in. So we wanted our own rabbi eventually. We got him, you know that. But that's what cemented it.
And can you tell me more about what that took, what the process was to make
Well,
that
I-
happen?
Well, you had battles. This group wanted to go that way. So the easiest way was reform, because they weren't the old-fashioned Jewish men. They were the modern brand. So we got we had Rabbi Rose, who was more the older guy.
And that's Rabbi Herbert Rose.
Yeah,
Herbert Rose, yeah.
yeah.
And-
With his wife, Hannah. He had a wife too. And he would come at Christmas time. He was the rabbi for the hospital at Christmas time.
Yeah, we'd work on,
And clergyman for the hospital.
yeah,
And we'd go there and play bridge with him.
yeah, that was the first reach out.
But how did the organization happen?
Well, there were people in the group that really knew how to organize. They had a better Jewish background, and they thought they had a board member. I was on the board once, and they
Me
would
too.
fight among themselves.
Yeah.
Really,
See, they'd have an audience at board meetings. All that would go on, this lady, usually lady, would get up and talk how they did it back where she lived. And the other one, you couldn't accomplish anything when they talked for half an hour that way.
there was
I wouldn't go to a board meeting
Sarah
because of that.
Sarah Jane Cole was very involved. She was a young lawyer at that time, and they were Jews at heart, and
Yeah,
they wanted to increase the population. Many of the children didn't get their, the proper background, and so they had to bring in a real rabbi. They had somebody teach them how to do the
yeah, even among the fellowship, there were a few Jews who were learning much better than most of us. So they handled that part of it.
and eventually it took off. They did not want to have the congregation to grow. Wait a minute, Bill. They didn't want the congregation to grow. They wanted to keep it small.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was battling on that issue. But in spite of it all, it grew because there were more people coming into the community.
There was a need.
And they needed more.
See, also, along your line, IBM announced in 1964 they were going to build. So that elevated everything by 10 years, I'm sure. We came along in 1960. and it was starting to show up. We'd get better Jewish scientists in, you see.
And tell me, so that in fact when it started, it doesn't sound at that time there were a great many people here.
And not highly devoted people, no. It was,
But you all just made that happen with
Well,
even.
sometimes just by being there, you add a little bit of the better picture.
you know, Gilda was involved. And Herbie was involved, and the Sarah Jane was involved. There were just a bunch of, you know.
Sarah Jane, fortunately, was not a lady who just knew hot air. She had some brains. So she was active along with Rabbi Bronstein, getting women into the
She
organization.
didn't want to grow. She wanted it to be.
You know, I think she's right.
She wanted it to be a small community, but in spite of it all, it grew. I mean, you
Yeah, I
go
would
there.
say Rita's right. Sarah Jane wanted not a tiny one like was with the fellowship, but she didn't want a big, big one like we have now. See? Like we have now is like having 70,000 Christians on a Sunday in Texas.
Okay,
See?
we're gonna.
Good place to pause.